Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine. We have a few things to talk about today, as usual, dealing with foreign policy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of activity and a lot of maneuvering in the House and the Senate right now. It's a little bit late.
Yeah.
They're going to talk about how do you stop a war. Of course, I always believed that it's much easier, much better, and much more ethical to prevent the war and don't get involved in war. And if you are, it's proper, and you know what the end point is. And of course, we're involved still in a major confrontation, a war going on, in particular right now, dealing with Iran and Iraq, because we've combined those, the two countries together because of our effort.
Yeah.
But we certainly worked hard back in 2002 and 2003 to try to prevent this thing from starting, and it's still ongoing. And so the war is there now. Now they're getting serious. You know, it's interesting that a lot of people have died. You know, our drones have killed a few people, you know, and people have died. And all of a sudden that, you know, with the recent assassination, everybody said, oh, this is bad. And now the politicians are speaking out. We have to do something about it. And there are some resolutions, one in the Senate and one in the House.
Yeah.
And it's probably well motivated by a lot of people who want to do something because they're so frustrated. But it's minor compared to what happened, but it still should be said. But you know, they've run into a few roadblocks. It's not the place to go for an honest, open debate, and that is in the U.S. Congress, because there's so much control by public opinion by other forces. So it's at least they're talking about it, and it took a long time to end the Vietnam War. A lot of people died, and all I remember is, you know, when Nixon won, he was to stop this war, and he expanded the war, and still 30,000 Americans died after Nixon won. And the loss of life is not anything like that, but the danger is still there, because who knows what type of war this will evolve into. I work on the assumption that there's already war going on with Iran, you know, and this whole excuse to do anything they want, because terrorism, we have to do something. But when you use a lot of drone activity and you kill innocent people and you put on sanctions and people die from this, that is war, and it's true. A lot of people die even without bombs. By sanctions, you might not have medication and food because of our mischief. And obviously, we've had the position we shouldn't be there. We shouldn't have, you know, precipitated this. We ought to come home. And now, I think there's a little bit of discussion right now, and we want to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, and as our title suggests, the House will vote on a bill today that we'll discuss a little bit later. But, you know, all of a sudden there's a big push now in the House and the Senate. We got to have a vote on this war powers issue. And, of course, the administration being as administrations are emboldened, the executive branch nowadays, I think they kind of shot themselves in the foot, because what they did is they sent a team of people over there to strong arm the Senate and the House. And here's the story, here's the facts, here's what you got to do. And a couple people didn't take very kindly to that. And one of them was Mike Lee, the other was Senator Paul, two Republicans from Utah and from Kentucky. They did not like the way that the administration handled them. They did not like the way the administration did about an hour and a half briefing, I think it was. And in fact, we have a short clip from Mike Lee, who was, I think, on fire yesterday. He was so furious. So we can maybe put this up and listen to a few seconds.
Which I would add was probably the worst briefing I've seen, at least on a military issue, in the 9 years I've served in the United States Senate. What I found so distressing about that briefing was that one of the messages we received from the briefers was, do not debate, do not discuss the issue of the appropriateness of further military intervention against Iran. And that if you do, you'll be emboldening Iran. The implication being that we would somehow be making America less safe by having a debate or a discussion about the appropriateness of further military involvement against the government
Yeah, and this is the worst briefing I've ever attended in 9 years. And this is from Mike Lee, who earlier in this talk was very praising of President Trump. He's a big supporter of President Trump. But he said, this is nonsense. It's bizarre. If you even debate this, you're going to be aiding the enemy. And that's...
Yes, and the briefing, I have mentioned several times on this program, tends to be a farce. You know, when they come and they give you a briefing. I attended a few early on in my political career, and I came to that conclusion that it was nothing more than propaganda. And they were passing out the propaganda, especially when it was leading up to the war in Iraq. And two of our close friends have been working with us on our organization, and the late Walter Jones and Jimmy Duncan.
Yeah.
They caught on to it, and a little bit late, but they caught on to it, and they say that they've been lying to us.
Yeah.
And it infuriated both of them. They became very pro-peace and understanding of the foreign policy. But this is what they do. They propagandize. They have control of the media. Nobody realizes the question they should be asking. They're starting to ask now: where does this authority come from, and who should give this authority, and who's allowed to do this? And they haven't recognized, if they're anti-war, you better quit allowing people to get us engaged in war, because once the troops are, on the ground and they're being attacked, every time we tried to get troops out, oh no, how are they going to come home? How am I coming home? I said, the same way we got there.
Yeah.
We marched in, just march them out and get them out of these hot spots. But anyway, thinking about who should be given permission, because I think that's key. How do they go to war? And just recently, there was an amendment in the military authorization to prohibit exactly what's going on and not spend any money attacking Iran. And it passed, and it was in the bill until it got to conference.
Yeah.
So somebody behind the scenes who have a lot more control than the public think they have with the Senate and the House. So that, to me, represents a sinister force called the deep state. It involves the military people and people who can do that and rig this whole thing. And in a way, isn't it interesting that they remove the prohibition, and then not too long afterwards, then we have the assassination?
Yeah, exactly, in the escalation. You're right, they did have a chance with the NDAA to keep that language in, and they refused to. Now we're facing two bills. One is in the House, and that'll be voted on today, introduced by Representative Slotkin from Michigan. Now that bill, we talked about this before the show, and I thought maybe you'd lean in favor of it with a lot of reservations, but you actually had a stronger reaction. My first reaction was pretty strong. I may have even uttered a curse under my breath, because essentially it's very, very political, and I shouldn't be surprised that Pelosi and her group would be so political about it. But essentially it's, Trump's getting all the limelight for this. We need to have the spotlight on us. But essentially what they do, and this always happens because both parties love war so much, they basically concede all the points and then say, but you should have done a little bit differently. And here's the first point, the first finding in it, which essentially would justify the attack. The government of Iran is a leading state sponsor of terror and engages in a range of destabilizing activities across the Middle East. Good thing we don't do that. Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was the lead architect of much of Iran's destabilizing activities throughout the world. Well, if he was basically the Hitler of the Middle East, then how can you argue that it was a dumb idea to take him out?
Isn't it interesting that, a month ago or 2 weeks ago, there's not many people that ever even would recognize the name Soleimani, and here it turns out that he's the monster of the world, and he caused all this. And once again, this is not to defend everything he has done,
sure.
But what he does in the interest of his region, his area, and defending his country. But see, that should become really irrelevant to the average American citizen or the American soldier, because getting involved carelessly and not legitimately and not legally, they never have an exit strategy. But I don't think they want an exit strategy, because that would mean that would change the NDAA and the appropriations. They always need something to make sure the military appropriations go up every year. It's not just maintaining it; it always has to increase. And it's interesting. The other day when they were reporting on this, the financial stations had a list of all all the companies that made weaponry to find out what their stocks were doing, and the stocks were soaring.
Yeah, exactly. Up, up, up. The Slotkin bill is a bad bill, and it has this sort of, it mimics the idea that they're going to reduce the president's ability to make war, but it talks about our actions in the Middle East as being self-defense, whereas in fact we have no business being there in the first place. We wouldn't need self-defense if we weren't where we were. So really it's an exercise in futility. You might say, well, at least it will allow for a debate. But the question is it going to be an informed debate? And unfortunately, when you look at the facts that are misrepresented and everything that's presented here, it's not going to be an informed debate. It's not going to have two sides. Like you had that experience many times on these kinds of resolutions.
Right, and they play games with the War Powers Resolution.
Yeah.
And that's what was passed in 1973 as an effort to prevent another Vietnam from happening. And like so much of what they do in Washington, oh yes, the war shouldn't have been fought. It was done in a bad fashion. So therefore we're going to pass this regulation to make sure that it's very difficult to start another war. And guess what happened? The War Powers Resolution actually makes it easier to go to war. They get a 90-day reprieve to put the troops in. By that time, then, if they're not out, what are you going to do with it? People say, oh, well, you can't walk away. You can't abandon the troops. So, but it's also interesting, Daniel, that when that bill was passed, Nixon vetoed it. So if we're against it, and right now Bolton wants to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But they interpret it, the little bit of restraints they put in there, that's way too much. They don't want to say, why don't we just use the restraints of the Constitution and have people of character dealing with this issue. They say, oh no, this gives the president, is taking some power away from the president, so they want to repeal it. But from their point of view, they want to make it worse. But in many ways, Daniel, I see this as almost irrelevant on the technicalities. Not that we shouldn't debate them.
Yeah.
And Mike Lee is going to do a good job here about making that point. But, the laws don't matter if you don't have people of character.
Yeah.
We have a law, and it's called the Constitution. I think it's pretty clear on what you do. And in the early years of our history, when they used military force, it was always done with clear permission, from the Congress. And if they expanded it or changed it, Jefferson would go back and get permission again, for it. But that doesn't happen. What they do now is as much sneaky stuff as possible. And then the justification isn't the American people decide, oh, we want a war. I've mocked the idea, oh yeah, well, we have to have a war because the young people of this country, the 18 to 25-year-olds, want to go over and see if they can fight those 18 to 25 years over and around. So let's get together. It's always somebody else that is doing this, and they get in there and they control it and they pass it. And to me, one of the most powerful forces is a deep state effect. The military-industrial complex, and they have a combination of power with the media, because propaganda is key. Because they changed the propaganda, Persian Gulf War, as well as the Iraq War. They just pump it out and pump it out, and they've done it now too. Nobody ever heard of Soleimani up until a couple of weeks ago, and now everybody knows he's Hitler. And boy, even the Democrats who hate Trump and are condemning Trump for doing it, oh yeah, we got rid of the worst guy in the world. He was the champion. And what about when a country bombs another country, for 10 years and 500,000 people are casualties, and our government admits to it, and they think that people wouldn't get upset. And what I'm referring to is Madeleine Albright, who admitted that many people died when we were bombing throughout the 1990s.
And they pour the lies on it. Pompeo is a master of lies. I mean, he just pours it out like water. He was asked for evidence. You say that an attack was imminent. We had to go in there and do something. Well, what's the evidence? I'm not going to give you any evidence. I don't have any evidence. In fact, his press conference, Lee wasn't the only one infuriated. His press conference infuriated Senator Paul from Kentucky because he just couldn't. The lies were so much. He couldn't stomach it. And here's what he said. And the senator is pretty friendly toward Trump and the administration, but he just couldn't take this. This is from an article about Paul's reactions. Senator Paul called out Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for his insulting notion the White House policy is aimed at getting Iran back to the negotiating table for peace talks. Here's the senator. No naive child would believe that. You'd have to be brain dead to believe that we tear up the agreement, we put an embargo on you, we kill your major general, and they're just going to crawl back to the table and say, what do you want, America? I mean, military escalation is really what you'd predict with this. So
that's too logical for the people to accept, but that's pretty good. But Pompeo was in the Congress when I was there, and I had my suspicions, but I didn't know what was coming because he is deeply placed in the deep state. Believe me, he is owned by the deep state, and he has further ambitions. Exactly what happens, we don't know. But when he was put at Secretary of State, he did this with Senate approval. Bolton, at least people have become aware how bad Bolton is, but he was so bad he couldn't even get a Senate approval. But so often this takes time for people to understand that this is why a particular law or somebody who's taken the oath of the Constitution isn't the issue. The issue, of course, is people's attitude, the people you put in charge. Is there any integrity? What kind of character do they have? Because even if you had an open-ended thing where you could say, "Oh, I can do whatever I want," but a decent person wouldn't go off and start these wars. But it's been done, and we've been in the Middle East for way too long, and we have to think about how this is going to come about. So, as frustrating as this is, the two debates going on, and it looks like Lee might support Kane's resolution. If he does that, that'll move it along, and that's good. And there's been some statistics, and we've argued this too. The people are more with us, but we can't control the mainstream media and the propaganda and how they control legislation. In Washington, who controls the briefings? And most members of Congress, want to go along with their party, but it's a bipartisan effort, and that's why there was no question just a couple weeks ago about the money for the military. It's like you've committed treason if you don't vote these trillions of dollars for perpetual war. It's really quite annoying.
It is, and the mainstream media just loves to send out the lies, even though they hate Trump, but they love the war lies. I should have mentioned earlier, and I'm glad you brought it up, but the Kane bill in the Senate is a lot better than the Slotkin bill in the House. It's cleaner. It doesn't have these political jabs, at least at this point, at least the version that I've read. But I would just close by saying, the one thing, Dr. Paul, we get some criticism on our comments, and again, love the comments. We both read them. But they say, why don't you have a blanket condemnation of Trump? Why are you guys always giving him a pass? Why are you guys always doing this? And I even responded to one of the guys and said, if that was the case, then what's the point of us being here? We hope that he does something right. We hoped that Obama would do something right. So that's the reason we do this. And I would say to Trump supporters, especially, I've done this a couple of days ago, that Trump is in trouble. The neocons hate him. Pompeo hates him. He has his own ambitions. He wants to be senator or president or who knows what. They hate him. They're leading him down a dark path. Is he to blame? Yeah, Trump should know better. Maybe he does. I bet they fought him hard on de-escalation because they were just frothing at the mouth after the Iranians dared hit this base in Iraq. Although if you look at the satellite photos, they were very precise. They hit exactly on the mark. And I think that's the purpose. It was to send a signal to the U.S. We've got some pretty good missiles. We don't want to have to use them, but we will. And I think it's good. It's a good sign that Trump took that message, if that's the case, fought back against his chairman of the Joint Chiefs, his Secretary of State, and so on and so on. There is a chance for Trump to do the right thing, and we hope he does. He's going to have to fire a few people and bring on some actual pro-American advisors. There are a lot of pro-American conservatives out there that understand that a war with Iran and its continued escalation is not good for us. So let's hope that he does wake up and do that. there's no point in giving up, right, Dr. Paul?
You know, I've made the argument that we're in a war. It's going to get worse, but I don't think we're going to have World War III similar to World War II with a lot of tanks and bombers. That's probably old-fashioned right now. But it can be equally dangerous because of the electronic age and the cyber security and all the things that go on. There's a lot of death and destruction that can happen that way. And yet I still believe that the American people, especially the young people, I never met them when I was campaigning. Oh yeah, I need a war. Even the military. The military, I got a lot of support from the military. They're not looking to go and get shot at. Most of them are there because they believe in national defense. And most of them that have suffered in the Middle East in recent years have been in the National Guard. And that's really psychologically designed to make you think you're protecting, you know, the homeland. But anyway, the American people, I still think, would rather have peace than war. And peace candidates do well. I think Trump did well in the last campaign because he was more for peace than his opponent, Hillary. So this is a clear message. But right now, you know, and Daniel pointed out, but this might not help Trump. You know, if somebody leans toward Trump, and if he were consistent and always work for peace and bring troops home rather than bring 10 home and send over 15 more, that doesn't solve the problem. But the good news is that there's a people alive and well. And we had a young man yesterday, a military person, had started an organization, Military People Against War, and he's going to be visiting with us a lot more. So that is good. But here's an article from Common Dreams, and I think it's a liberal group. And this is a good headline. He says, we need everyone in the streets, more than 180 events planned across the U.S. to protest Trump's march to war with Iran. And this is very good. And I think, and this might be in time to prevent 500,000 troops either going in, like in the Persian Gulf War or Vietnam. I guess a million overall on those 10 years. We've had a million people in and out of there, and of course we had over 60,000 of them killed. So, but this is good, and we'd like to stir up the interest and have them move. And the more we can work with other groups, because, you know, one thing for sure that I learned in politics is you do not have a universal agreement on all the issues with anybody, you know, because we all have our emotions. That's what's so great about libertarianism. We don't challenge other people's beliefs. We only require one thing: do no harm, don't commit crimes, don't harm other people, don't steal from people. Then you can have any opinion you want. And if you want to go and fight a war in Iran or someplace else, actually we don't have any prohibitions against it. What we have prohibitions against is using the power of the state and the war machine, constructing these wars, you know, and sending innocent kids over there to tell them, oh, this is national security and we need to do it, and we have to listen to Pompeo's lies in order to pursue this. But no, this is good, and I think we should do whatever we can, and we will, with the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, will continue to work in this effort to bring as many groups and as many people together in saying, look, we have a tough enough time in all the things that we do in life. Why don't we do it outside of the realm of fighting a war that is not justified for lies and on lies that are told by our leaders? I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.